2017, I had played surprisingly less games than I had played in the previous years. Only 20. That's the lowest I've played in a year since 2011, where I had only played 17 games, which was before I even started doing these games I played in years countdowns. I think the reason I didn't play as many games last year is because I already had played a lot of the games I wanted, but at least this time around I didn't get too many games that were too similar to each other, so therefore I can talk about all of them. Time to start the list.
And begin!
I've seen gameplay footage of some of the Nintendo 64 Rayman games, so I thought maybe I should give the first Rayman on the PlayStation a try. But once I did, it quickly became one of the most unforgiving pieces of frustration I've ever touched. The first couple levels are tolerable, giving you a false sense of security, but then after a few levels, it goes from fair difficulty to one of the most brutal gaming experiences of my life. This game takes the spike and bottomless pit tropes in gaming and spams them up the butt, making it very easy to die. The levels are divided into multiple parts, which actually makes this worse since you have even more to deal with. I swear, I've been in several situations where I started playing this game at like 9, I started a level, and I died so many times on it that by the time I was finally done with the level, it was past midnight. I am not kidding you. Almost as if they made it bad on purpose for some sick joke. This happened to me more times than I'd care to count. For this franchise's sake, the rest of the series better not be like this. For years I've heard people complain about Sonic Riders, but not elaborate on why it's so bad. But after getting my hands on it, as someone who really wanted to like it, I can still come up with better reasons for hating it than they do. The items are used right away instead of being held onto, so you can't control when you use them or not. The quick start system is awkward because 1 microsecond makes all the difference, and you'll only get in first whenever the game decides to feel sorry for you. I looked up guides what I'm doing wrong, but it's just poor design choices. Another problem is the time where you're grabbing onto things and have to rotate the control stick. It feels so finicky and kind of makes my palms hurt. There's also the matter of that annoying announcer that never shuts up. It keeps repeating the words, "Character is slowly gaining momentum! This character is slowly gaining momentum!" The sharp turns will be your worst enemy here, because you might not be able to turn fast enough. Also, you have to charge up your jump. What kind of mechanic is that? I'm also not a big fan of the pit system. Maybe it's just because I don't have enough patience, and I know that NASCAR races use this, but it's just not my taste. Though I guess riding the wind behind characters is an awesome mechanic, but this game is still underwhelming. Especially after trying out Zero Gravity and then giving this game another go, because it only reminds me of what that game did that this one didn't. Fast RMX isn't as good as its predecessor. It's not a terrible game, but it's pretty poor. It could have been better if it actually did something to innovate. It feels like I'm playing the exact same game. It still serves as a great homage to the FZero franchise. It has fantastic visuals, amazing music, and great speed. And it does bring back levels from the previous game while still introducing some amazing new ones that are greatly designed. I mean, for heck's sake, one of the first levels in the game takes place near the surface of the sun, but they give no indication what tracks are from the first game and which ones are new tracks. This is especially a problem since next to no one ever plays the first game, so it's even harder to know, considering how some tracks are DLC courses from Fast Racing Neo, and no one bothered to tell me that Fast Racing Neo even had DLC to begin with. But I don't hate it. But if they make another of these and it doesn't look that much different from its predecessors, you might want to count me out. After Sonic the Hedgehog 4 wasted its potential, I was hoping that Sonic Mania would do what 4 didn't do. And it just so happens that this is a fun game. Even though it does recycle some levels from past installments, the second acts of them have some big changes, especially in Chemical Plant Zone where you put a certain substance into the water to solidify it. That way you can use it as a bouncing platform. Also, it has some pretty sweet boss ideas. A trash compactor-like boss where the walls close in on you but you raise your platform, and even a reenactment of Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. I did not expect to see that, and even though the special stages have already been used before, at least they're not the same overmilked ones from Sonic 2, which have been used in like 80% of the games in the series. It's definitely a game you should get if you're obsessed with the classic Sonics. Though it also reminds me of how stupid Silver Gunner is, where he keeps remixing every song in this game into a Totino's, aka Diet Color Splash theme rip, instead of something better and more original. I didn't have very good memories of Sonic Forces, and it seems like a lot of people would definitely see why. Because this game isn't very well made. The story is unimpressive since it brings in past villains only to do nothing with them. There's literally no reason to have classic Sonic in the game other than to appeal to nostalgia-blind fanboys. Most cutscenes are just told through dialogue boxes, and the levels are way too short, some of them being yet another remake of levels that have already been done to death in the series. Probably the thing I remember the most of it is something that contains huge spoilers. They even managed to take a level where the sun is about to crash onto the planet and make that level bad. Because instead of making me think about how intense the scenario is, it made me think more about how frustrating the level is, and because the song that plays is sung by someone who is even worse than Justin Bieber, Rebecca Black, and Misha combined. Part of me wants to believe I hate this game because of that, but then I'd be singing to the level of the butthurt Bowser fanboys who whine about my hated characters list because of one entry. And it was more enjoyable than I remembered. I mean, it's nowhere near as good as Unleashed Heroes or Colors, but the levels themselves had some great gimmicks to them. One of them has a giant water slide, another has the chain reaction of bomb blocks. I can't really explain what else I like. It's bad, but I found some joy in it. And it's kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg is a pretty fun game. Not what I expected of it, but in no way is it bad. Sonic Team really hatched a good idea when creating this game, using eggs to bowl over enemies and feed them to make them grow bigger and bigger. In fact, even when you're pushing an egg, you can actually go faster with it. Once they're big enough, you can hatch them into power-ups, or these awesome creatures that have abilities like ice or fire. But I do have a few complaints with it, such as how if your egg gets stuck on the top of a ledge, you have to wait forever for it to respawn. The later half of the game can get very cheap, no pun intended, and the whistling and the music can be somewhat obnoxious at times. But I still like the game, and it should probably get a sequel. As it turns out, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is indeed pretty good, but it's not nearly as good as its predecessor. Why? Well, even though the landscape is nice, the characters weren't quite as memorable as the ones from Xenoblade 1. Also, there are even more instances of not knowing where the heck you need to go than there were in the previous game. Especially since now they mark even less of where you've already been. But at least it still has what makes Xenoblade games great. Great soundtrack, huge landscapes, and a great story. The game also has a new gimmick called Blades, which are essentially legendary people who allow you to use certain attacks. It's kind of hard to explain. That's actually dumb, but at the same time, it does allow for different strategies. Then we have this new system called Bonus Experience, where you sleep at inns and gain more experience points depending on how much you've done, because sleeping makes you stronger somehow. I also like how you have ways to interact with the environment now, though admittedly it can be pretty annoying, since it can put your game progress to a screeching halt on several occasions by being another example of not knowing where you should go. But this game is still something that you could enjoy, though I feel like it could have been a little less weird. Even though I think it's stupid for people to hate on Hey Pikmin just for being different, it does have a few problems like how the Pikmin are even more fragile than before, the frame rate stinks, and the fact that you can't carry as many Pikmin at once. However, now you finally have the ability to jump thanks to your new jetpack ability. Also, even though you can't have as many Pikmin at once, not as many will die at the same time. There are also some underwater levels that, believe it or not, don't stink. Then again, considering how I don't hate as many water levels as I think I do, that's not really saying much. But there are also some cool flight sections, and there are some cute cutscenes with Pikmin when you come across them. The Pikmin Park is also an addicting feature where you send some of your saved up Pikmin to search for the bonus Sparklium to get you closer to your goal, except there are some areas that only certain Pikmin can access, which is kinda cool. Hey Pikmin also has some nice minigames in it that you'll just want to play some more. While the graphics do feel a generation or two behind, and I don't think it's as good as the main series games, it's good. As someone who grew up with Crash Bandicoot, I've heard about Spyro and some of the manuals of the Crash games, and I never really got around to playing Spyro games. I can't really explain why. I guess I just thought he looked dumb. But after about a decade and a half, and watching a few Let's Plays of the game, I decided, what the heck. The first game was better than I thought it would be. First off, it manages to find a good balance in difficulty for most of the time, and as a result, it's usually not that cheap. Take that, Rayman! The game also has some flight levels where you're required to fly through and or shoot down certain things in the level. They're hard, but amazingly they don't make me mad. So overall, this is a fun game. So I kinda wish I didn't have the game yet, because of the recently announced remakes. Darn it, Vicarious Visions! Why do you have to keep waiting until after I've already played the first 2 games in your series before announcing the trilogy remakes? I was a bit skeptical about Splatoon 2, because I was worried it would just be a copy-paste sequel. In some ways, it is. But in other ways, it feels different. It has some new things such as bowling balls, bouncy pads. Seriously, how did I mistake those for conveyor belts in my 2017 anticipated games list? But some of the other cool mechanics include covering certain panels with ink to activate things, this new thing called a grapplink that makes you feel like you're using the hookshot, and certain other things. The special weapons grant you some awesome moves, such as creating a paint cloud that makes it rain paint on the battlefield for a bit. But the best part was that it made me love Callie and Marie even more than I already did. Especially during the final boss, but I won't spoil why. But if there's one complaint I have, it's the fact that in the main game you're constantly forced to use weapons that the game wants you to use, instead of something that would work much better. But I love this game a lot. When I was a kid, I once saw my cousins playing Crash Bandicoot War. I thought it looked awesome and I was like, oh my gosh, I want that game! But for over a decade I didn't know which entry that was, and even by the time I did, I had developed a policy to only play it after I play its predecessors. Now I finally have it, and even though I love it, I don't love it as much as I thought I would. I'm guessing it's the combination of over a decade and a half of anticipation, the fact that I've already had some Crash Bandicoot experiences, and how much easier it was to be entertained than it is now. And also because I grew up with that terrible huge adventure game that made me take this game's design choices for granted. I feel really bad for not enjoying it as much as I should. Wish I had grown up with it, but I still think it's an awesome game. It follows the classic Crash Bandicoot format while bringing in some new innovations, such as the relics and the new powers you obtain after beating bosses. I'd be more impressed by this if I hadn't already played Wrath of Cortex and Huge Adventure 15 years before playing this, but I can still appreciate it for what it's worth. For many years, Fire Emblem fans have been left out since nearly half the franchise was unavailable in America. But there was a faint glimmer of hope when Shadow Dragons and the Blade of Light got remade into Shadow Dragon and got brought to America, and so we hope that someday they would remake another Japan-exclusive Fire Emblem game and bring it here. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for 8 years, but when it finally got here, we got Fire Emblem Gaiden's remake, Fire Emblem Echoes. Not only is it a true Fire Emblem game, but it also kind of changes up the pace by having accessible dungeons that you can go through in adventure-like ways instead of the grid system. Nice way to shake things up. I also like how characters have their own voice clips when you select them, though it can get annoying after a while. I guess if there's one problem throughout the game that really bothers me, is that when you run into encounters on the overworld map, no, not the battlefield, the overworld map, you can't flee like in most games. As if having your chances of escaping being luck-based wasn't bad enough, at least then you had an option to escape instead of waiting until you beat the enemies. This is even worse with their low level, since in those times it serves no purpose other than to waste time, since they pose no threat and give very little experience. But every game has its issues, even good ones like this. Now all they need to do is remake all the other Japan exclusive ones. Even though I haven't played any ROM hacks not counting Mario Maker, I do feel bad for the people who are unable to play the another Metroid 2 remake ROM hack anymore because of how Nintendo took it down. But even if I was able to play the ROM hack, I probably wouldn't enjoy it as much as Metroid Samus Returns. Nintendo went above and beyond with what they could have done. I've been waiting for a true Metroid game for years, and we finally got what we wanted. Return of Samus for the Game Boy was the only Metroid game that had aged even worse than the NES Metroid, since it was even easier to get lost in the overworld thanks to the lack of color and the limitations. But now, not only does it have color, but a map, which granted is to be expected from a modern Metroid game, but I'll tell you what's not expected, being able to shoot in every direction instead of just 8. The bosses are also improved. Even though you mostly just fight the same 4 bosses like in the Game Boy version, this time all 4 of the Metroid types actually have bigger differences, so it doesn't feel like you're facing the same boss 39 times. Plus, thanks to the new Aeon gauge, you have new abilities like a more powerful beam, and being able to see what blocks are breakable around you without having to waste a power bomb. It doesn't really feel like its Game Boy counterpart, but with what we got, there's no doubt that it's all worth it. I can't believe I was close to forgetting about this game. Since I loved Hyrule Warriors and I loved Fire Emblem, I knew that I was going to love this game. It's very addicting with the act of taking out dozens of enemies at once, and surprisingly enough, the act of constantly hitting the button doesn't tire out my hand as much as most rapid input sequences do, so don't worry Josh Gosher, you won't have to hurt me because I don't think of it as a button masher. And it really does feel like a Fire Emblem game. Not only does it have the experience of something like most RPGs like Fire Emblem, making it feel more like a Fire Emblem game, minus the fact that it's not turn-based, it also brings back good memories of Awakening and Fates. But it probably could have branched out to a bit more Fire Emblem games. But it's nice seeing some of the lovable characters, including all the cool men and great waifus, I mean strong women. My point is, this is a very addicting game. Now if only we could get a Kingdom Hearts Warriors game, that would be a dream come true. For years we've been promised a Banjo 3E, yet heard no word on that, because of those morons who work at Microsoft ruining Rareware. That line at the end of Banjo 2E has no reason to exist anymore other than to taunt us. Well, looks like we'll have to settle for Yooka-Laylee. Even though a lot of people hate it, I personally love it. Just like the Banjo games, the humor here is top notch and the music is a joy to listen to. Also, look at all this breathtaking scenery. These are some of the best graphics I've seen. The game does have some serious frame rate issues in some places, and glitches that force you to reset your PS4. They didn't happen to me as often as you'd think, but when they did happen, I was pretty annoyed. Even still, there's some nice callbacks to Banjo Kazooie with some cool transformations, but not as nice as the ones in Banjo Kazooie because of how slow some of them move. Also, there are only 5 worlds! Love the game though. Ordinarily, I don't put games on the games I've played in years list if they're mostly just remakes of games I've previously played, but Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga DX truly does feel like a modernized Superstar Saga. The graphics are not only enhanced, they're downright gorgeous. I'd assume they weren't since they're on the same system as Dream Team, the game that has boring graphics, but they made it work with the shading. The gameplay's improved too. Now you can see your enemies' levels so it'll be easier to tell if you're a match for them or not. There are also a lot more warp pipes, so that saves you more backtracking. But best of all, if you die against enemies, your progress does not get erased as long as you retry the battle. But it did come at a price. Some enemies' attack patterns have been dumbed down to the point where even a 3-year-old can see them, and it didn't need that atrocious luck-based side mode. And unfortunately, this doesn't even seem like the only terrible side mode in Mario & Luigi RPGs, since the upcoming Bowser's Inside Story remake is also going to have one. Nevertheless, this game is even better than the original, and it might even be one of my favorite Mario games. Kingdom Hearts 2.8 is a very enjoyable experience. Even though it's only a couple hours long, it's worth every penny for me. Though, in all honesty, it didn't really need to exist. Its only real purpose was to reveal why Mickey didn't save Aqua, even though we didn't know about Mickey seeing Aqua until this game's trailer, so what's the point? But I don't want to come off as someone who hates this game, because being pointless was its worst crime. What about the game itself? The graphics, while they would look poorly animated in a movie, in a game, the color scheme makes it look really nice. The overworlds are beautiful, and they really look like the remainders of those worlds after they were consumed by darkness. Some thought that we were only going to see Castle of Dreams, but I knew that we were going to see a couple others, because we also got Dwarf Woodlands and Enchanted Dominion. Also, they finally made the Blizzard command useful since it temporarily creates an ice rail which you can use to slide on. And how many times do you get to fight literal waves and stacks of Heartless? That is certainly amazing in my book, and if this is the engine of what Kingdom Hearts 3 will be, then I bet we're in for a great adventure, just as long as Square actually fixes the problems with Dream Drop Distance. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is probably the most realistic Zelda game ever. Though probably too realistic, because it doesn't really feel like a Zelda game at times. It feels like they were trying too hard to be like Xenoblade Chronicles. Yes, I know it was co-developed by Monolith Soft, but you understand what I'm saying, right? So, to continue, I do like some of the realistic elements in the game, but sword durability meters? Seriously? They also think it's a good idea to make restoring health take more time, where instead of just picking up hearts, you have to go into the menu repeatedly. Thankfully, you can pick up food if you cut down trees or do stuff like that, and cooking food isn't as boring as I thought it would be. It's quite fun, but does Link really need to make a disgusting sound whenever he eats cooked food? But enough with the negative talk, let's tell you why it's this high on the list. The exploration is a lot of fun. This is the biggest overworld we've ever had in a Zelda game, making the overworlds of Twilight Princess and Wind Waker look inferior. While I still think that Twilight Princess is better than this game, this is one of the darkest Zelda games because of how Ganon has destroyed Hyrule, and the overworld gives a feeling of loneliness. Not only that, but it doesn't even need screen transitions when you go to new areas. Well, with a few exceptions of course, like entering the Divine Beast dungeons and trial shrines. It's also the first installment in a decade to have horseback riding. This is definitely a game that you should pick up.
Bravo!
Let's be real here. If you didn't think Super Mario Odyssey would make the list, then either you've been living under a rock or you just didn't think about it. But what can I possibly say about this game that hasn't already been said by millions of other countdown artists? The great graphics? Already talked about. The levels? What else is there to say? The music? Everyone knows about that, from the greatness of Fossil Falls to the awesome Jump Up Superstar sung by Jessica Rabbit, Pauline. The ability to possess things? Well, there is one thing I can bring up. Before I played this game, I was worried that it would be hard to tell what you can and can't possess, but it wasn't. Now, if there's any complaints I have other than the plot, since everyone told me I'm not allowed to have an opinion on Peach always getting kidnapped, it's that it has no hub world other than the Odyssey ship, which is the size of just one small room. Even the Starship Mario had more stuff to do. The way they advertised it, they made it look like New Donk City was going to be a hub world. And mind you, it was still an awesome level, but talk about misleading. Though, to be fair, that was probably not intended. But I wish Talkatoo did a bit better job with the hints, instead of just using silly metaphors that no one will understand. But aside from that, and a few small nitpicks like having to see Mario make a stupid face whenever you save, this game deserves all the hype that it's gotten from its fans. But what could be higher? You are about to find out. After absolutely adoring Pokemon Sun and Moon, I had very high expectations for the new versions, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. We got another epic adventure that was absolutely beautiful, just like the original Sun and Moon. I had an excuse to experience the amazing memories of Sun and Moon all over again, while still feeling like I was playing something different in the later part. Especially since there are a few new areas, and even some Pokemon that weren't in the Alola decks before. But honestly, I don't think some of these changes were made for the better. For example, some lines they took out, such as press A to pound the ingredients, and how they removed a great cutscene that helped establish a great connection, probably because of one line. It's not the fact that they removed them that's the problem, it's what I think their reasoning is. My closest guess is that some idiot at Game Freak heard jokes that people were making about those lines, and actually took those jokes seriously. I mean, removing lines just because of jokes people were making is just stupid. Another bad change was something that contains huge spoilers from both these and the original Sun and Moon. Skip to this timestamp if you want to avoid spoilers. For example, even though Lucamine is still my favorite Pokemon villain, I think she's kind of confusing now. I mean, this time around she wasn't intoxicated by Nihilego, so there's no longer a reason for her to have been abusive to her children, or freeze those Pokemon and not unfreeze them even after she turns good. But at least you can now go to the Ultra Beast worlds and find Ultra Beasts in their new habitats. Team Rocket also makes a grand return, and even though I'm not their biggest fan, it's awesome seeing them team up with villains from other Pokemon teams, though I have no idea how they managed to get them from alternate timelines from where they succeeded. I kind of prefer Sun and Moon over these, but these games are still tons of fun, if only because it brought back amazing memories of its predecessors, which were beautiful games. Maybe that's a sign of bias coming from me, but it's good enough for me to have these games as my favorite games that I first played in 2017.